Hey, so can everybody hear me? Sweet. All right, so we're debating today the issue of transgenders service in the military. Now, to start with a couple definitions, I believe they're pretty self-explanatory, but transgenders are, just to be clear, people who identify as a gender separate from the gender that they were assigned at birth. And service in the military, I think, is pretty clear. So, in order to kind of understand exactly the situation around this resolution, let's talk a little bit about the current system. Now, in the current system, what we have is transgenders are currently allowed to serve openly in the military. That's an Obama era policy that Trump is seeking to change, but it hasn't been changed yet. So we have a year of experience of transgenders serving openly in the military. Our discussion should be centered around what actually has happened in the US military. Okay, and with that out of the way, I'm going to be providing two reasons why the transgender service in the military is in fact not a bad thing at all. In fact, it's something that they definitely should be allowed to do. My two reasons are, first, that discrimination is morally wrong unless there's a really sufficient reason for it. And this is pretty self-explanatory. We shouldn't be discriminating against people on basis of their race, sex, sexual orientation, or sexual identity unless there's a really good reason. And when we're talking about the military, the only reason we should have for not letting someone serve in the military is military readiness, readiness to defend the nation. So the only reason we should have for preventing transgenders from serving in the military is if they would actually compromise their military readiness. And that's something that just doesn't happen. I'll get into more details. I'm sure my opponent will have some arguments to bring up about this, and I'll be explaining why this really doesn't happen when I'm responding to those arguments. But my basic point here is that it's morally wrong to argue to just forbid transgenders from serving on the basis of their being transgenders alone. My second point is that transgenders actually contribute to military readiness. You see, unfortunately, right now, the US military faces a major recruiting problem. There just aren't enough people to join. And when we're talking about excluding an entire group of fit individuals from service in the US military, we're talking about undermining our national security and our military readiness. I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's a good thing to do. We shouldn't discriminate against people. And in this case, it's something that actually will harm us.
All right, I'm on. Okay, so you laid out what we are going to address, readiness being the most important of those things. Let's get to that second, because I'm really looking forward to hearing your argument on how transsexuals add to readiness rather than don't just detract from it. But first you said that we shouldn't discriminate unless there's good reason, which I couldn't agree with more, my friend. Which is why we have people often point to the history of the military, how we've social experiments in the past that have worked, most famously integration, right? Back in the 40s when we desegregated the military, there were some similar arguments to the one we're having right now. But the truth is that race isn't a barrier to being a good soldier in any sense, and anyone is sure to tell you that. So I think we can all agree on this. But for a transsexual, that's a little bit of a different ballgame. There are physical problems that would arise from having transsexuals serve, and it's really a cultural debate, right? You're changing the military for reasons that don't add to its readiness. There is no benefit that I can detect that would make the military better at killing anybody because trainees are involved. So let's just examine the situation. If there is a transsexual training with a unit, he's going to have special needs, and special needs don't fit in with the military at all. We've got a job to do, and we're very much focused on that job. There's not a lot of fat to cut. So when you have any sort of these personal things, it just doesn't matter who you are. And it's important to remember that none of us have a right to be in the military. You're going to be disqualified for a wide range of reasons, including, say, sleepwalking, because it detracts from your ability to serve. So I don't think that transsexuals are anywhere near what I'd call beneficial to being a part of what the military does. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic back to you with 40 seconds left and let you respond to that because I made 2 solid points there.
All right. So from what I can tell, you made the point that there are going to be physical problems integrating transgenders into military service. And then you also said that there's no right inherently to be in the military. Now, I'm going to go ahead and agree with your second point because I don't believe there is a right just inherently on virtue of you being a human being or an American citizen to be in the military. But I don't think we should be discriminating people solely on basis of their sexual identity. That's ridiculous for a couple of reasons. First, it's morally wrong. And secondly, what we also see is that it hurts our military readiness. I'm going to go over this point quickly because you mentioned something about that. Now, currently, the U.S. military is facing a recruiting shortage. And the problem is Americans aren't signing up in the numbers that they used to. There are thousands of transgenders currently serving in the military. To say that they shouldn't be is to kick them out, as well as prevent people from actually serving in the military who are transgenders in the future. So what you're doing is throwing out an eligible population of American people from serving in the military. And we were already facing shortages in the number of people we need to maintain our national security. That's going to be a big issue in the future. So your second argument was about how there are physical problems with transgender people actually serving. Now I'm going to have 2 responses to this. First, you haven't outlined any specifics about what this is. So I'm not sure exactly what you're mentioning here. So if you could bring up some of that stuff in your next speech, that'd be great. And secondly, where's the empirical data? Now, as I mentioned, Obama actually put out this order. The Obama administration required transgenders to be fully integrated into the military. They could serve openly. So if this is really a problem, then we need to be seeing it from records of transgender service. That's something that just hasn't happened. So if you could actually show some examples of that, again, that'd be fantastic. There we go.
Okay. First of all, you said we've had a year of transsexuals being allowed in the military. That's accurate. And you want to base this debate on how it's gone with this year of them free to serve as they please. The problem with that is that there are barely any transsexuals in the military. And the number you're going to come back at me with is probably 14,000. That's an often repeated number for people who are transsexual and in the military. I don't know how that exact number was arrived at. I know there's 2 large studies that were done, but there are not 14,000 transsexuals in the military. I did my 4 years and I never knew one transsexual, and I never knew anybody that knew a transsexual. And I realize that's anecdotal, but painting this as a widespread thing, it isn't, and it's disingenuous to say so. So as far as the physical problems that arrive, one of the main issues with allowing trans people to serve as an everyday part of the military is that they have medical issues, a lot of them. There's a surgery involved for a transsexual case. And generally on the left, it's agreed that the military should pay for them to complete their transition. No, this puts them out of service for, say, 2 years about. I mean, give or take, it depends who you are. You're going to mutilate your body with hormones. You're cutting your genitals off. None of this has anything to do with the military, and it doesn't make you a more effective fighter. It does not. If you are in the military, you are a transsexual, you get the military to pay for this operation, and you have now become a woman, because this is what we're talking about. The female to male transsexuals are a very tiny minority. Then your ability to function in the field is severely limited. Not to get too graphic, but it's a real thing that you have to dildo yourself every 3 days, or the wound in your legs will close up. The body's not designed for it, and medical science hasn't found a way to get beyond this. That's not something I want to deal with in my fighting position. It doesn't have anything to do with what we do, and it's a distraction. This is what I mean by physical limitations. Despite all the other statistics of massive suicide rate, greater instances of disease, all sorts of negatives with the population in general that I realize doesn't apply to every single transsexual, but it's not a selling point. So you can work with that, my friend, and I will toss the microphone back to you.
All right, great. I understand what you're saying. it's not necessarily an easy thing. There's some accommodations that have to be made. I'll say that, but I believe it's worth it because the accommodations that we really have to make are pretty minimal. Now I'm going to go specifically over your points. So you said, first of all, that there aren't really many transgenders in service. Now, according to a RAND Corporation study done, which was commissioned by the Department of Defense, there are between 1,320 and 6,630 active duty transgender service people currently. Now, of those, 250 people are the people who are actually undergoing transition surgery. So of the thousands of people currently in the military, there are only a small minority of them that are actually going under the surgery, which is actually bringing me by your second point, which is where you're talking about how the surgery puts them out of commission for a long time. Now, as I said, there are only about 250 out of the thousands involved getting this surgery. So that's a small minority of the people involved, a small minority of people who are putting out of commission for this surgery. And so that's not really a big issue. Now, your third point about it being a distraction to people who are involved, them having to deal with this, is again, it's a very small issue given the few number of people who are actually undergoing transition therapy. Now, if you're joining the military solely for the purpose of trying to pay for your transition therapy, that's not going to work. The military, if they have an indication that you're trying to just do that, isn't going to accept you into service. So I don't think this is going to be a big issue in the future. Like this idea that it is a distraction. The other issue with that is that there's more than just combat roles in the military. There are logistical roles, service support roles. So it's not really just this whole issue of transgender service in the military means we're stopping them from combat roles. There's plenty of other roles they can serve in, even if it's a significant enough distraction to prevent them from actually attaining combat positions, which it isn't. And the final thing, again, is still, you haven't provided any empirics or examples or studies about how this has actually happened. Since we have had military service, and there are 17 other countries in the world that allow transgenders to serve in the military, you'd expect to see that actually happening. So until you can provide me with the statistics, I don't think these points should really count for much. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic.
Okay, right. Specifics. There aren't a lot of direct stories of trannies in the military either excelling or being completely terrible, because there's not a lot of transsexuals in the military. It's not a common thing. But this is all beside the point. We can get bogged down in who's likely to get the surgery and if it's a number that matters. The truth is, it doesn't matter. There is really only one question for any military issue, and I am considering this a military issue. Does this, whatever's in question, make the combat element more or less effective in killing foreign nationals? That's it. And as you said, there's non-combat roles, lots of them, a lot more than combat roles. If you're not in the infantry, you exist to support them, and you have to ask yourself that same question. Okay, that's what the focus is. Nowhere in this equation at all does making an allowance for any gay or trans issue exist. I just don't care. It's not the military's problem. Period. The military resents overwhelmingly these social experiments placed on it, and we should, I say as a Marine, it's not appreciated. It's the same thing where you're talking about trans people, or when they have these anti-tobacco pushes that try to ban it for the whole military. That's the thing. The concern, the military, these are interest groups supporting their own thing, and they use the military to push it. Like this is not lost on us. You understand? It's an attempt to change the culture of the military, and the culture of the military more or less works. It's an inherently masculine culture, and to throw trannies in the mix that demand acceptance for when they call themselves a pansexual or non-binary or whatever, the terms are somewhat lost on me, but it's just such a civilian thing that it's laughable to those of us that have been there. There's no off limits topic in the military to talk about, but this doesn't get discussed a lot. It's not even an interesting thing for the most part. One, it's rare, and two, it just really hasn't been pushed till now. I've been out about 2 years, so maybe things have changed, but we're not going to accept people bringing their own interests to a fighting organization. Never have, and no real fighting organization ever will. There's business and there's personal, and in the infantry at least, we really know how to separate the two. So if you want to take your dildo to the field, I can't get behind that. We just pack lighter, my friend. I'll pass you the mic.
All right. Just to be clear, I'm not here acting like the military is just this big social laboratory. But I don't think that discriminating against people who are actually fit to service solely on basis of their gender identity. I'm going to address specifically the points you brought up, saying, first of all, that the real one question that we're concerned about is military effectiveness. And I'd agree with that. As long as somebody's not contributing to military effectiveness, if somebody's harming the military effectiveness and that's proven, then they shouldn't be in the military. But the real thing that we have to be looking at is what's actually happened. What's actually happened is not this idea of us just having suddenly this social experiment interfering with the operations of the military. And I'll bring up a little more information about that in a minute. What we really need to see from the service is that it's actually harmed military effectiveness. So if you can show me the examples and the statistics, the empirics, the evidence about it, then that'd be greatly appreciated. And secondly, your whole last portion of your speech was talking about social experimentation, where you basically said that the military isn't supposed to be a social laboratory. And again, I'd agree with this. But the idea that the military does not want transgenders to be in the service, well, some veterans, such as you, don't want that. The majority of them actually do. Now, that's not just among the top brass in the Pentagon, which just because I'm on that, I'm going to bring up the fact that Joseph F. Dunford Jr., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military officer in the United States, actually opposes the removal of the military. But it's not just him, it's also the ordinary people in the military. The university poll found that 55% of voters in the military house, transgender people should be allowed to serve in the military. So just the idea that military people support the removal of transgender people from the military is just plainly false. So I'm going to hand the mic back.
Okay, fantastic. Look, I will more than assure you that the military in general does not want transsexuals among us. And I know your poll results say differently, but trust me, man, please talk to a few of us. It's a lot less lonely there for guys like me. There's different jobs in the military. You've got to understand that. And I come from the Marine Corps infantry, so we might have a bit of a cockier attitude. That's well known. And I think that transgender people would do better as an Army pogue, frankly. But they don't belong there either, because they don't bring anything to the table by virtue of their being trans, and they do have negatives by that same virtue. All right, that it's to deal with, and we would have to deal with it. You can be denied from the military for the absolute most mundane of things. Asthma. You had an attack once. Nope. Hope that wasn't documented. You're not getting in. You sleepwalk. Kicked out. Took Adderall in high school. That gets real questionable. But you come to the recruiter's office wearing a dress and insisting that despite your chromosomes, you are something that you are scientifically not. We do not have time to deal with that. So you want more empirical evidence, though. I can tell you stories all day. Let's get empirical. The trainee shows up to recruit training. Where do you put him, her, it? It has to qualify under male or female training standards, fitness requirements, right? Is it going to do 3 pull-ups or that 20-second arm thing that the chicks do? It is a man. The blood test will reveal, but here it is, hanging there for 20 seconds and acing the fitness test. Is that fair to the chicks? Is it fair to the dudes? It doesn't really work out for anybody. This is a real problem, and that's the absolute very beginning of it. It doesn't end anywhere. Sex is real. Now, you can have your definitions of it that involve being whatever you want to be. There's sperm, there's egg, X, XY chromosomes. You are one of these things, excluding birth defects, which again are not allowed in the military. We don't have to play a game where we acknowledge anything else because it simply detracts from the fighting force. Uh, it's going to stay that way realistically. They could free up the entire military to as many trainings want to flood in, and it's never going to really be a big deal because they're not going to succeed on the level of a normal dude that signs up to go fight for his country. It's not going to be a major issue in the end. But on the level of should it happen, should we even deal with it? I say no. And I hope you're still there. We got a loading thing, and I pass you the mic.
Yes, I'm still here. Can you hear me just to be clear? Okay, great. Now, I think what you really argument down to is just the idea that, well, first of all, people can get kicked out of the military for a ton of stuff. And so if somebody's harming military readiness in any way, that we should get rid of them. And it gets complicated when you're involving transgender people. Now, I think this impacts directly back to the first couple of arguments I brought up. First, what you're talking about here is getting rid of someone solely based on their identity. Doesn't matter whether they've had transsexual surgery or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what gender transition surgery, that's what it is. What you're talking about when you're saying that transgenders should not be allowed to serve in the military is anyone who identifies as a separate sex, whether openly or not, should not be allowed in the military. So you're really talking about something more than just complicated involving hormone therapy or complications involving where do you put someone man but is biologically a woman or whatever you want to say. But if you go back to what I originally brought up, we see that, first of all, there's this issue of discrimination, which we both agreed is morally unacceptable. And we have to look at them when we're seeing the transgenders. I believe that what we see also is that they contribute more to military readiness than they take away from it. We see, first of all, that they actually can and do serve in the military. There are thousands of them that are serving in the military right now, thousands more veterans. And we also see that that their costs of involving people, even involved in gender transition therapy and surgery, are minimal indeed. The amount of money that the military would spend, according to the Rain Corporation study, on transitioning every year is about, at max, 8.4 million. And that maximum number is only a tenth of what they spend on money for erectile dysfunction medication. That's just the way it is. It isn't a big problem. They aren't affecting military readiness. In fact, they are contributing to it by being ready and willing soldiers in a volunteer army. And because of that, I believe it's unacceptable to say that they shouldn't be allowed to serve. I'm going to head them back, Mike.
Okay, I was hoping you'd bring that up, man. I love your statistics. You're absolutely right that the U.S. military, or VA included, does spend more on Viagra than for any transsexual gender reassignment surgeries. I can't tell you how in favor of that I am. I don't understand as an American how you can not support veteran boners over re-engineering our entire military. It's going to change, though, if we pass this law that says, oh, no, trainees are quite welcome, because it's expected that we provide this surgery for transsexuals. We did it for Bradley Manning when he was in Leavenworth, a traitor to the country. He still got it. So, yeah, I think your regular grunt will be very much hooked up should this become legal. You keep saying that they don't take away from the military effort, but what do they bring to it? That's my question. Why should I care that a trainee has some inherent right over other groups that are commonly denied for the military to come in and be part of this? He offers what? A different cultural perspective? It's not one we need at all. I think that there's a sudden love for all things transsexual in the past, 4 or 5 years. This used to be a much more rare thing. You didn't see a lot of trainees about town, but now you can go to your local college and you can find a larger trans population. I don't think they're necessarily joining the military in greater numbers. I think they would if you could get surgery out of it. But these aren't people that are going to be trans in 8 years. There's a reason that the suicide rate for trans is 40% as it stands. It's not bullying, by the way. And then it jumps up to a much higher ratio once the dick comes off. That's something we need to consider. The government paying for this surgery, this idea in people's heads that is not improving their lives, that's a whole new line that we really haven't crossed yet as a nation, and I frankly hope we don't. Anyway, as long as we've got the Trump years, we won't, but who knows what comes next. It's not something that's going to change soon, and I have faith that it's not really going to change ever, because the military is what it is, and the American military is very effective. And we do remain interested in staying effective. That part of military culture has never changed. So this is always going to be a side issue, and not a very consequential one. I'm running out of time now, but I have made my point.
Okay, so in your last speech, I think you offered the first being that they don't really offer something. Now, with all due respect, I believe that transgender military people actually offer just about the same thing as any other military person. That is, someone who's ready and willing to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. And that's something that we actually can't overestimate or underestimate the effectiveness of. Because, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Army is having a lot of trouble, in the U.S. Armed Forces in general, having a lot of trouble just recruiting enough people. We have to recognize that there's really and offer this opportunity of service to transgender people, besides just the issue of discrimination. So they do offer something, indeed. They offer military service, something that we really do need. And secondly, you said that there weren't really too many transgender people. And you kind of connected this to this whole idea of it being a cultural phenomenon. That's because, in reality, it's become far more acceptable in the past few years to become a transgender person. It was pretty much universally frowned upon before. The reason we see more people coming out and admitting to be transgender is because it's become more acceptable. People have realized you really shouldn't just make fun of someone or discriminate against them because of their sexual identity in the present few years. So that's why there aren't that many, but there definitely are a lot of transgender, as I've already mentioned out, a lot of transgenders in the military currently. And thirdly, you brought up the issue of suicide rates. Now, I don't see what this really has to do with the issue at hand. If someone's being suicidal or is depressed, the military isn't going to let them into the military and join it. And also, so I don't really see what that has to do with the issue at hand. At the end of the day, I think transgenders should be allowed to serve in the military for all the reasons I've earlier brought up.
Okay. Current transgender service members should be kicked out tomorrow, and we should take no more. The suicide rate is just indicative of the population as a whole. Why would you want to import that? The whole host of mental health issues. I got this from, but I know it's accurate now, that the likelihood of a transgender person issues is about 2.5 times as much as anybody else. Sounds about right. So that's without even considering transsexual itself to be a mental health issue. It's not a population that brings a lot to the table. We're going to talk tactics and how to kill things better. That is the military. Nothing else matters. So that's why I am reluctant to discuss that they can't flourish as people without being part of the military somehow. It just doesn't matter to me. It's not the military's problem. Thank you for your time, man. You really made the point here, but I hope that we keep the military as untrans as it is right now. Have a nice day, sir.
I'm going to go ahead and end the debate then.